Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to try something a little different. We're going to try and understand a whole country's story, but not by looking at decades of history. Nope, we're going to do it by looking at the news from just a single day.
In the country we're zoning in on, it's Zimbabwe. The specific day we've picked is Sunday, October 26, 2025.
So what can one day's news really tell you about a nation? Well, as it turns out, a whole lot. A handful of seemingly random headlines can actually pull back the curtain on some deep, underlying truths, about a country's struggles, its character, the whole shebang. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to look at 5 major contradictions that popped up in the news that day, and then we'll pull it all together and see what this wild mix of stories really says about the bigger picture in Zimbabwe.
All right, first up, let's talk about the economy, and specifically the story the government has been telling for a very, very long time.
So on one hand, you have the official government line. And get this particular day was actually designated Anti-Sanctions Day by the Southern African Development Community. So of course, the government was out there, full force, blaming illegal Western sanctions for all the country's economic problems. But at the same time, you had this other story, this counterargument bubbling up, and it says, hey, wait a minute, the real problem isn't from the outside, it's homegrown. We're talking corruption, greed, and just plain bad mismanagement.
And when you look at the numbers, things get really interesting. See, the reason Zimbabwe can't get international credit, it's not really because of sanctions. It's because the country has failed to pay back over $18 billion in foreign debt. I mean, wow, $18 billion. That's a number that makes any lender on the planet incredibly nervous.
And if you want to understand the scale of the internal problem, look no further than this. The country's own Anti-Corruption Commission. They admit that Zimbabwe loses more than $2 billion a year to corruption. Every single year. I mean, just think about that. That's money that could be building hospitals, funding schools, fixing roads, just gone.
Social justice advocate Tendai Ruben Bafana put it perfectly in an article that day. He said the true albatross around the nation's neck isn't Western pressure. It's the greed of its own leaders. The country is basically sanctioning itself. And this idea of internal decay, it's not just about the economy. It goes way deeper, right into the security of the state.
Which brings us to our next point. And this one is, well, it's pretty chilling. It's a warning that didn't come from some political opponent or a critic. No, this came from the people who used to be on the inside, the ones who guarded the state's biggest secrets.
So you've got 2 former heads of the Central Intelligence Organization, the CIO, who both published memoirs, and their message, it's a stark one. They're basically saying, hey, another coup could happen. Why? Because they claim the intelligence services are getting tangled up in the ruling party's internal fights over who's next in line for power. And that's exactly what was happening right before the 2017 coup that put the current president in charge.
And when Professor Alan Manariarwa analyzed these memoirs, he called the situation a ticking time bomb. The real fear here, the thing that's so dangerous, is that the very institutions that are supposed to protect the nation are instead being used to protect one political faction. And as we've seen time and time again in history, that is a recipe for serious instability.
But this erosion of trust, this institutional decay, it's not just happening in the spy agencies. Nope. On that very same day, the news cycle showed it was also eating away at another pillar of society, the world of academia.
Case in point, on this particular Sunday, the news was buzzing that Vice President Kembo Mohadi was being awarded an honorary doctorate in leadership. Now, you might remember, this is the very same official who had to resign back in 2021 because of a huge sex scandal, complete with leaked audio recordings.
Yeah. And he's not alone. He's just joining a list that seems to be getting longer. Take the ICT minister. She calls herself doctor, but there have been some pretty credible media investigations alleging that she literally paid someone to write a fake PhD thesis for her.
And this trend even includes the First Lady, who also got an honorary doctorate last year. It makes you wonder, right? What are the criteria for these supposedly prestigious awards when they're handed out to political figures with no obvious academic background to back it up?
So, what's the real story here? Well, one lecturer, who stayed anonymous, put it bluntly. These doctorates aren't about scholarship or leadership. They're about currying favor. Academic honors are becoming just another tool for political backscratching. And when that happens, public trust in the whole education system just crumbles.
Okay, but maybe the most shocking contradiction of the day, the one that really hits you, comes from 2 stories.
When you put them next to each other, they reveal this massive, frankly troubling disconnect between the country's leaders and its people.
So on one hand, the government issues a nationwide health alert, and the numbers are just awful. We're talking a massive surge in preventable diseases. In just 1 week, there were over 9,000 new cases of common diarrhea. 12 more people died from malaria, which has already killed 401 people that year. It's a clear sign of a public health system that is completely overwhelmed. Now, at the very same time that this grim health alert is going out, the president is at the State House. And what's he doing? He's having a big photo op, gifting a comedian a brand new Ford Raptor truck, $10,000 in cash, and a house, all for winning a comedy award. A public health crisis on one side, a luxury truck, and a pile of cash on the other. I mean, that contrast, it really does speak for itself, doesn't it?
All right, our last story from this one day is something that, in a country with such a divided and, let's be honest, often toxic political scene, was genuinely shocking. It's just not something you see every day.
So, a prominent politician from the ruling party, a guy named Killer Zivu, gets on social media. But he doesn't attack the opposition, no. He actually defends his party's main rival, the opposition leader Nelson Chamisa. He basically told critics to stop it and back off. Now, in Zimbabwean politics, that kind of cross-party defense is, wow, it's almost unheard of. It kind of makes you wonder if even some of the politicians are getting tired of the endless political fighting. So, let's step back. After sifting through the news from just one 24-hour period, what have we learned? Well, a pretty clear picture starts to form, doesn't it? It's a picture of a nation that is just tangled up in these deep, systemic contradictions. You see, these aren't just separate, random news items. They all connect. They weave together to paint this picture of institutional decay. It's a place where the official story from the top is constantly clashing with what people are actually living through every single day.
And all of this leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. When a nation's official story, the one told by its leaders, is so completely different from the reality people are facing on the ground, which narrative wins? Which one ultimately prevails? And maybe more importantly, what happens to a country that's stuck right in the middle of that conflict?